Hi everyone, welcome to the parish. Today we are on our final week discussing the parables of Jesus. In 2 weeks, on February 21st, we'll start a new series that will take us through Lent up until Easter. And it will be from the Gospel of John, the statements that Jesus made where he said things about who he was. I am the gate, I am the good shepherd. What did he mean by those things, and what does that mean for us today? That's what we'll be starting in 2 weeks. Today, we are finishing up a parable that we actually started last week. It was long enough that we've split it into two pieces. The parable is often called the parable of the prodigal son. You may be familiar with the story. There's a younger son who goes to his father, who's still alive, and demands that he be given his inheritance. He goes off and spends it all. He gets hungry, and so he decides to come home, not sure how he will be received, and his father welcomes him with open arms and throws a celebration for him, throws a feast, invites the neighbors, gives him gifts that symbolize that he is not only restored to the family, but he is an honored person in the family, a person in a place of position, a person in a place of power. The father completely restores him, gives him all the rights and privileges that he had as a son previously. So that was the story between the father and the younger son. Today, we're going to read about what happened with the older son. So the celebration is going. This is Luke 15, and we are in verse 25. It says, the older son was in the field. Coming in from the field, he approached the house and heard music and dancing. He called one of the servants and asked what was going on. The servant replied, your brother has arrived, and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf because he received his son back safe and sound. Then the older son was furious and didn't want to enter in, but his father came out and begged him. He answered his father, look, I've served you all these years, and I never disobeyed your instruction. Yet you've never given me as much as a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours returned, after gobbling up your estate on prostitutes, you slaughtered and fattened the calf for him. Then his father said, son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. I think in this story, the father serves as the mediator. The father is in the middle, and here's the interesting part. The father is the only one whose character is seen throughout the story. The first part is about the younger son, and then he kind of disappears. The second part is about the older son, but it's the father who's the go-between. He's the connecting thread that runs throughout this whole story. And he has the sons who are polar opposites. Now, we've talked about the fact that the parables Jesus told were not in and of themselves true stories. He was using those stories to teach something about the kingdom of heaven and what the kingdom of heaven was all about. And we talked about the fact that one of the storytelling devices he used to make his point was that he would tell stories of an extreme, stories where there was hyperbole, stories where there were polar opposites, and it was to help make a point. So in this story, you have the one son, the younger son, who is completely unconcerned about tomorrow, completely unconcerned about his family, even his own well-being. He, as Jesus said, he spent the money that he got as his inheritance on wild living, riotous living, one translation says. So we've got that son, the younger son, on one end of the extreme. And on the other end, we've got the older son, who was the do-gooder, the goody two-shoes, the one who always did everything right, the one who was always trying to live up to all his responsibilities, to please his father, to do what he was supposed to and toe the line. And so we've got these two sons on either end of the spectrum, and in the middle, we have the father who is trying to be a mediator between the two of them, the father who is the middle way, the father who's inviting both of them to move into where he is. Because we know when the younger son decided to return home, the father saw him at a distance and went running to welcome him back. By the same way, in this part of the story that we're reading today, the father leaves his guests and pleads with his older son, not something that the host at a feast would necessarily do, to leave his guests behind. A man at his station of life would not typically go and plead with much of anyone. So to leave the party and to go beg the older son to please come in, please come back, that was not something that someone would expect him to have done. And so he was trying to get these sons who were on opposite ends of the spectrum to come to the middle with him, to be in the middle. And so I think we have some things that we can learn from these two sons. You know, the older son was not a bad person. We kind of view him as like this entitled, spoiled brat. And yet we can kind of understand his point of view, can't we? I mean, have you ever done a group project where you were maybe assigned to work with some people who just didn't know what they were doing or weren't doing what they were supposed to do? And maybe you just took all of it and said, you know what, just give it to me. I'll take care of it. I'll do it because I know it'll get done right and I know it'll get done on time. Have you ever been that person in a small group project? I know I have. And the thing is, you go to turn in that assignment. It's at work or at school, wherever you're doing this assignment. And the boss or the teacher looks at the assignment and praises the group. You did a wonderful job, and you all get the same grade, or you all get the same acknowledgement. Or maybe someone else in the group gets credit where they really don't deserve it. And we're kind of in the background going, hey, I'm the one who did all the work here. Why is no one acknowledging me? And I think that's what's happening with the older son. You know, the fact is that if he hadn't stayed and helped his father keep things running, keep their land producing, the younger brother wouldn't have had much to come home to. And so I think we can understand the older son feeling some resentment. The thing is, the older son didn't really realize his value. He didn't realize that he was loved, not for what he did. He was loved because he was his father's son. In fact, it's been suggested, not just by me, by scholars, that this parable is really incorrectly named if we refer to it as the prodigal son. It really should be the loving father, the parable of the loving father. Because the father, as we said, is the one who connects it all, who brings it all together, who shows his sons, you are both worthy of my love. You are both my children. All that I have belongs to both of you, and you are both invited in to be part of me, to be part of my family, to be part of my household, to have all that I have to offer you. It's yours for the taking. And I don't think the older son really grasped that, because he says to the father, I slaved away for you. You didn't even give me as much as a little goat to have a party with my friends. And the father said, everything I have is yours. In other words, if you wanted to have a party with your friends, you could have. Everything I have belongs to you. You had all the resources that you needed. You had my love. You still have it. And I'm inviting you to meet me in the middle, to meet your brother in the middle, to recognize that he is beloved just as you are. And you know, the interesting thing is, Jesus was telling this story to a group of religious people who were criticizing him. In fact, Luke sets that up for us at the beginning of chapter 15. He had said at the beginning here, all the tax collectors and sinners were gathering around Jesus to listen to him. The Pharisees and legal experts were grumbling and saying, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. And then Jesus told them a series of 3 parables in quick succession. This one about the lost son was the last one. Previously, he told them, earlier in Luke 15, he told them about the lost sheep and the lost coin. A shepherd who left behind 99 sheep in order to go find one who was lost. A widow who had 10 coins and left 9 of them to go sweep out the house and look for the one that was lost. And in both of those stories, when the people find what they were looking for, there's great rejoicing. They call others to come celebrate with them. And Jesus says, in the same way, there's much rejoicing in heaven when one who is lost is found. And he's had this theme that's gone throughout this whole storytelling instance. where the critics are saying, why are you eating with these people? Why are you welcoming them in? And Jesus tells them 3 stories in quick succession about something precious that was lost, something that was found, and that it was celebrated. And so the interesting thing about this last parable, the one of the lost son, or as I like to call it, the one of the parable of the loving father, the interesting thing that Jesus adds to this particular story is the element of the older son, someone who resented that grace and kindness and mercy and love was being shown to one who wasn't towing the line, who wasn't doing what they were supposed to do, one who wasn't living up to all the responsibilities. And so Jesus was saying to his critics, that's not what my kingdom is about. I'm not about keeping score and who does the most right things and who does the least right things. I'm not about who's in and who's out. Everyone who comes to God, just as the sons in the story came to the Father, anyone who moves in closer, who comes to the middle, is welcome and accepted. And I think in talking to this group today, I realize that a lot of us identify with this first son, probably more. We identify with what it feels like to be marginalized, what it feels like to be left out, to feel unwelcome, to be uncertain about whether or not we're really loved. But I think we need to also recognize that there are times where we can be like the older son too. Maybe you're a religious person who's very interested in keeping rules, and you see a person like me and you criticize and think, boy, she is awfully free with that love and grace of God. She doesn't talk enough about that punishment and that wrath. There are some of us who identify ourselves as marginalized, and we don't realize that we look down our noses at the people who've marginalized us. And we say, well, they don't really know what following Jesus is about. I'm the real Christian. I'm the real one who follows Christ. And that person over there, forget about them. Jesus did not do that. He invited people who were at that extreme to come closer. He stayed. He talked with them. He didn't write them off. He told them stories. He taught them. He wanted them to learn and understand that all are welcome, all are loved. And it's important that we remember that, and that we not write off the people who we think aren't living the way they ought to live, aren't being enough like Jesus. We have to remember the Father, the Heavenly Father, Mother, invites all of us to move closer. This is not a return to your abuser talk, all right? I'm not saying that if someone has abused you or mistreated you or threatened you physically or spiritually or emotionally, I'm not saying make time for that. I'm not saying return to that dynamic. In fact, Jesus told his disciples in another passage that they were to go and preach the good news of the gospel, and if they weren't well received, then they were to shake the dust off their sandals and leave. So I'm not saying go back to a place where you're unsafe. But what I am saying is recognize that not one of us is more welcome at the table. Not one of us is more loved by God than anyone else. We are all invited to the middle. For the times when we identify with the younger son as a person who's been hurt and marginalized and distanced. For the times when we grudgingly admit that there are parts of us that want to exclude and remove and write off. Lord, help us to recognize that we are all invited guests. Everything God has is ours for the taking. I pray that we will understand how wide, how deep, how high is the love of Christ, and that being rooted and grounded in that love, that we may be filled with the fullness of God, that we will understand that we are beloved, and that we will then be able to turn and give that kind of love to our brothers and our sisters and our siblings, inviting them to meet us in the middle. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Be blessed.